Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight, we'll drift into California's endless terrain. California is where the planet experiments with possibility, gathering every conceivable landform into one elongated slice of continent. Here, ancient forces continue their patient work, lifting mountains, carving valleys, shifting coastlines with the measured pace of geological time. It's a place where extremes coexist in quiet conversation, where the highest and lowest points gaze at each other across a single valley. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. The Salton Sea spreads across California's southeastern desert like a vast mirror, reflecting sky and circumstance in equal measure. This body of water, now California's largest lake at 343 square miles, exists as a testament to human accident and nature's persistence. In 1905, irrigation canals from the Colorado River breached their carefully constructed levees, and for 2 years, the entire flow of the Colorado poured into this ancient dry lakebed. The waters filled the Salton Sink, a depression sitting 227 feet below sea level, creating an inland sea where none had existed for centuries. Today, this accidental lake has become essential habitat for hundreds of bird species migrating along the Pacific Flyway. Yet, it remains a troubled paradise, its salinity increasing each year as agricultural runoff provides its only replenishment, no natural outlet to cleanse its waters. The sea remembers its desert origins, even as pelicans wheel above its surface, a reminder that even our mistakes can become ecosystems, even our accidents can nurture life. Rising from the desert floor just 85 miles north of the Salton Sea's depression, Mount San Jacinto presents one of North America's most dramatic elevation changes. From the desert floor near Palm Springs to the mountain snow-covered peak at 10,134 feet, the landscape transforms through nearly every life zone found between Mexico and the Arctic. This vertical journey of nearly 11,000 feet occurs in less than 7 horizontal miles, a gradient so steep that you could theoretically experience summer and winter in the span of a morning's hike. The mountain face rises like a granite wall, catching Pacific moisture and creating an aerial island of pine and fir forests floating above the desert. From its summit, you can peer down at the Coachella Valley's date palms and swimming pools while standing in snow. A peculiar vertigo of seasons and ecosystems compressed into a single view. The Cahuilla people called this mountain Aya Kaich, meaning smooth cliffs, and considered it the home of powerful spirits who controlled the weather patterns that sweep across Southern California. Off the Southern California coast, the Channel Islands float in the Pacific like fragments of an alternate California, one where evolution took different paths. These 8 islands harbor 145 endemic species found nowhere else on Earth, each one a story of isolation and adaptation written over thousands of years. The island fox, perhaps the most charming of these unique residents, evolved to be 1/3 smaller than its mainland ancestors, a phenomenon biologists call island dwarfism. These foxes, no larger than house cats, patrol beaches and cliff tops with an almost fearless curiosity, having evolved without natural predators. Meanwhile, the islands also showcase island gigantism. The Santa Cruz Island scrub jay grows significantly larger than its mainland relatives, and ancient mammoth bones reveal that elephants once shrank to the size of cattle here. The islands preserve a California that might have been where tortoises grew giant, where foxes became pocket-sized, where plants found nowhere else carpet coastal bluffs and spring blooms of yellow and purple. Beneath the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles largely forgotten by the millions who cross it daily, flows the Los Angeles River. For 51 miles, this waterway travels through a concrete channel that seems more infrastructure than river, yet it remains a vital force shaping the region's geography. During the dry months, the river appears as a modest stream, sometimes barely a trickle in its massive concrete bed. But when Pacific storms arrive, this channel transforms into a raging torrent capable of carrying 140,000 cubic feet of water per second, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool in less than a second. Before its channelization in the 1930s, the river meandered across the Los Angeles basin, regularly jumping its banks and occasionally changing course entirely, once flowing to Santa Monica Bay, other times to San Pedro Bay. The concrete that now contains it represents one of the largest public works projects of the Depression era, a geometric reimagining of nature that paradoxically preserved the city by destroying the river's wildness. Death Valley sprawls across California's eastern edge, like Earth's practice run at creating an alien landscape. At Furnace Creek, a thermometer once registered 134 degrees Fahrenheit on July 10, 1913, still recognized as the highest air temperature reliably recorded on our planet. The valley floor at Badwater Basin sinks to 282 feet below sea level, making it North America's lowest point, a depression so deep that the air itself becomes compressed and superheated. Here, the landscape inverts our usual expectations. Salt flats spread like frozen lakes. Rocks sail across dried mud, leaving mysterious trails, and mountains rise naked of vegetation like the Earth's bones exposed to sky. During rare rain events, the valley transforms briefly into a mirror of shallow lakes, reflecting peaks and clouds in perfect symmetry before the water vanishes again into the thirsty air. The silence here is so complete that visitors often report hearing their own blood circulating, a peculiar intimacy with one's own body prompted by the absence of any other sound. Off California's northern coast, hidden beneath the Pacific's surface, three of Earth's tectonic plates converge at the Mendocino Triple Junction. This meeting point of the Pacific, North American, and Gorda plates creates one of the most seismically complex regions on the planet. The junction itself migrates northward at about 2 inches per year, a pace that seems glacial to human perception, but represents breakneck speed in geological terms. As it travels, it leaves behind a wake of transformed landscape, uplifted marine terraces, new fault systems, and volcanic fields. Cape Mendocino, the westernmost point of California, marks where this triple junction currently influences the land, creating the Lost Coast's dramatic topography. The Cape experiences more earthquakes than almost anywhere else in California, yet between these moments of violence, it remains a place of extraordinary beauty, where Roosevelt elk graze on coastal prairies and gray whales pass close to shore during their ancient migrations. East of Yosemite's granite peaks lies Mono Lake, a body of water that belongs more to chemistry than conventional geography. At 2.5 times saltier than the ocean and highly alkaline, the lake creates an ecosystem that seems almost extraterrestrial. Limestone towers called tufa rise from its surface like Gothic spires, formed when calcium-rich freshwater springs bubble up through the alkaline lake water, precipitating limestone in fantastic formations. The lake hosts no fish. The water is far too alkaline, but supports trillions of brine shrimp and alkali flies, creating one of the most productive ecosystems per square foot in North America. Millions of migratory birds depend on this protein-rich feast, with Wilson's phalaropes, eared grebes, and California gulls arriving in clouds that darken the sky. The lake is ancient, at least 760,000 years old, making it one of the oldest lakes in North America, Its persistence through ice ages and volcanic eruptions speaks to the basin's unique hydrology, where Sierra Nevada streams flow into this terminal lake with no outlet to the sea. The San Andreas Fault stretches through California like a 750-mile scar, marking where the Pacific and North American plates grind past each other. In some places, this boundary moves constantly, creeping along at 2 inches per year in a motion geologists call a seismic slip. But other sections remain locked for centuries, accumulating strain like a drawn bow, waiting for the moment of release that will send earthquake waves racing across the state. Near Parkfield in Central California, scientists have instrumented one section so thoroughly that they call it the most monitored earthquake zone on Earth. Here, moderate earthquakes occur with unusual regularity, roughly every 22 years, earning Parkfield the title Earthquake Capital of California. The fault's path can be traced by valleys, ridges, and offset streams, geographic features that reveal the immense forces slowly rearranging California's landscape. In the Carrizo Plain, the fault creates a remarkably straight valley where streams make sharp, right-angle turns, their courses offset by thousands of years of lateral movement. Along California's far northern coast, the Lost Coast remains the state's most remote shoreline, a place where the land defeated the road builders. For 25 miles between Ferndale and Petrolia, no highways penetrate this wilderness, where the King Range rises directly from the Pacific, climbing 4,000 feet in less than 3 miles. The steepness of these coastal mountains, combined with the instability of the fractured rock and frequent landslides, made road construction economically impossible. This geographic defiance preserved one of California's last wild shores, where black sand beaches stretch for miles, interrupted only by the occasional creek mouth or sea stack. The isolation is complete. Hikers on the Lost Coast Trail must time their passages with the tides, as high water makes several sections impassable. Bears wander onto the beaches, Roosevelt elk leave tracks in the sand, and the only sounds are waves, wind, and the occasional bark of sea lions offshore. It's a coastline that belongs to an earlier California, before highways and hotels, when the edge of the continent was truly an edge. Lake Tahoe rests in the Sierra Nevada like a jewel in a granite setting, holding 39 trillion gallons of water so pure that you can see a white dinner plate 75 feet below the surface. This clarity comes from the lake's granite basin, which provides little sediment, and its size, so vast that particles settle out before clouding the water. If you somehow emptied Lake Tahoe, its water would cover all of California with 14 inches, enough to transform the entire state into a shallow sea. The lake maintains its purity through a delicate balance. Its only outlet, the Truckee River, removes exactly as much water as flows in from 63 tributaries and direct precipitation. This equilibrium has persisted for thousands of years, creating a high-altitude ecosystem that supports unique species like the Lahontan cutthroat trout, which once grew to 40 pounds in these waters. The lake's basin formed 2 million years ago, when faulting created a valley between the Sierra Nevada and Carson Range, later deepened by glaciers and eventually filled with snowmelt to create this aerial sea. Where the Cascade Range enters California from Oregon, Mount Shasta rises in solitary majesty, a 14,179-foot stratovolcano that creates its own weather. The mountain stands alone, separated from other peaks, allowing it to dominate the landscape for hundreds of miles. Its mass is so great that it forces air masses upward, creating lenticular clouds that hover like UFOs above its summit, and generating thunderstorms that seem to emerge from clear skies. 7 named glaciers cling to its slopes, including California's largest glacier by volume, remnants of the Ice Age slowly retreating up the mountain. The mountain is actually a compound volcano with 4 overlapping cones built over the past 590,000 years. Native tribes considered it sacred, the Wintu people believing it was the home of the Great Spirit. Modern spiritual seekers claim it possesses mystical properties, while geologists know it as one of the most dangerous volcanoes in California, capable of producing pyroclastic flows that could reach the town of Mount Shasta in minutes. California's Central Valley stretches 450 miles through the state's heart, a vast trough that once lay beneath an inland sea. Over 140 million years, sediments washed down from the Sierra Nevada and Coast Ranges, accumulating in layers up to 6 miles deep. These sediments tell the story of California's evolution: marine fossils from when the Pacific reached far inland, volcanic ash from ancient eruptions, gold-bearing gravels from Sierra streams. Today, this former seabed has become America's fruit and vegetable garden, producing 25% of the nation's food on just 1% of its farmland. The transformation required massive engineering, levees, dams, and canals that redirect water from north to south, fighting the valley's natural tendency towards seasonal flooding and summer drought. Before agriculture, the valley was a mosaic of grasslands, oak savannas, and seasonal wetlands that supported millions of waterfowl. Tule elk grazed in herds of thousands, and the spring wildflower blooms were so extensive that Spanish explorers wrote of valleys that appeared to be lakes of color. Point Reyes Peninsula juts into the Pacific like a geographical anomaly, and in fact, it is one. This triangular piece of land rides on the Pacific Plate, making it geologically separate from the rest of Marin County, which sits on the North American plate. The peninsula is traveling north at 2 inches per year, a geological hitchhiker that originated near Los Angeles 10 million years ago. The San Andreas Fault runs through Tamales Bay, creating a straight valley that marks the boundary between 2 pieces of Earth's crust grinding past each other. During the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, the Point Reyes Peninsula lurched 20 feet northward in a matter of seconds. The peninsula's rocks are completely different from those of the adjacent mainland: granite and marine sediments that match formations hundreds of miles to the south. This geological tourism has created a unique ecosystem where northern and southern species mix, where Douglas firs grow next to bishop pines, where Tule elk, reintroduced from the Central Valley, graze coastal grasslands that more closely resemble their ancestral home than any other place in California. High in the White Mountains of eastern California, bristlecone pines cling to life in conditions that would kill most trees. These ancient organisms, some over 4,800 years old, have found immortality in adversity. They grow in dolomite soil, a limestone derivative so alkaline that few other plants can tolerate it. The harsh conditions, freezing temperatures, fierce winds, minimal rainfall that would destroy other trees have become the bristlecone's salvation. Growing incredibly slowly, they produce wood so dense and resinous that it resists rot, disease, and insects. Some trees are more dead than alive, with thin strips of living bark connecting roots to a few surviving branches, the rest of the trunk weathered to silvered sculpture by millennia of wind and ice. These trees were already ancient when the pyramids were built, already weathered when Rome fell. Their rings provide a climate record extending back to the Bronze Age. Each ring a year's diary entry about rainfall and temperature written in wood. Beneath the city of Long Beach, the Wilmington oil field spreads like a buried treasure that became a curse. Since drilling began in 1936, the extraction of oil and gas has caused parts of the city to sink 29 feet, a subsidence so severe that buildings cracked, pipes broke, and portions of the harbor area dropped below sea level. The oil field, discovered in 1932, became one of the most productive in United States history, yielding over 1 billion barrels from sediments laid down millions of years ago when this area was deep ocean. The subsidence crisis forced engineers to develop a solution. They began injecting water back into the emptied oil reservoirs, essentially replacing the extracted petroleum with seawater to support the overlying rock. This process, called water flooding, not only stopped the sinking, but actually helped extract more oil by pushing remaining petroleum toward production wells. Today, oil derricks disguised as office buildings and artificial islands, camouflaged with palm trees and waterfalls, continue extracting oil from beneath the city, a hidden industry operating in plain sight. The Colorado Desert occupies California's southeastern corner, a region receiving less than 5 inches of rain annually, yet bearing the scars of tremendous floods. Flash floods racing down from surrounding mountains have carved slot canyons through ancient lake beds, creating narrow passages where walls rise 100 feet on either side, so narrow that outstretched arms can touch both walls. These floods arrive suddenly when thunderstorms over distant mountains send walls of water racing down, usually dry washes. The force of these floods is almost unimaginable, moving car-sized boulders, carving solid rock, and occasionally revealing fossils from the Pliocene epoch, when this desert was a verdant savanna populated by camels, horses, and giant ground sloths. Between floods, the desert returns to its patient stillness, where creosote bushes that sprouted from seeds 10,000 years ago continue their slow growth, where desert tortoises sleep through the summer in underground burrows, where the silence is so complete that the desert seems to be holding its breath. San Francisco Bay exists only because the planet warmed. During the last ice age, when sea levels were 400 feet lower, the bay was a vast valley through which the combined Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers flowed to reach the Pacific Ocean near the Farallon Islands, now 30 miles offshore. As glaciers melted worldwide, rising seas flooded this valley, creating the largest estuary on North America's Pacific coast. The flooding was geologically instantaneous, complete within a few thousand years, transforming a river valley into a vast inland sea. The Golden Gate, that famous narrow strait, was the river's passage through the coastal mountains, carved when the flow of half of California's runoff was concentrated through this single gap. Today the bay is surprisingly shallow, averaging just 20 feet deep, with 2/3 of its area less than 12 feet deep at low tide. This shallowness makes it vulnerable to filling with sediment. Before human intervention, the bay was slowly converting back to dry land, a process accelerated by gold rush mining debris that washed downstream. Mount Whitney rises from California's eastern escarpment like a granite wall, the highest peak in the contiguous United States at 14,505 feet. What makes Whitney remarkable isn't just its height, but its proximity to extremes. It stands just 84 miles from Badwater Basin in Death Valley, the lowest point in North America, at 282 feet below sea level. This proximity creates one of the most extreme elevation gradients on Earth, nearly 15,000 feet of vertical relief in less than 100 miles of horizontal distance. The eastern face of Whitney rises 10,000 feet above the Owens Valley floor in a near vertical escarpment, one of the most dramatic fault scarps in the world. From its summit on clear days, you can see across the Owens Valley to Death Valley's Telescope Peak, a view that encompasses the highest and lowest points in the lower 48 states. The mountain was formed by the same forces that created the basin and range, the stretching and thinning of the Earth's crust that dropped valleys and raised mountains along parallel faults. 30 miles west of San Francisco's Golden Gate, the Farallon Islands rise from the Pacific like ruins of a violent past. These granite islands, covering just 211 acres total, host the largest seabird colony south of Alaska, with over 250,000 breeding birds, creating a cacophony that can be heard a mile away. The islands are the visible peaks of an extensive underwater mountain range, most of which lies submerged on the continental shelf. During the gold rush, egg hunters raided these islands, collecting millions of Murray eggs to feed San Francisco's booming population, nearly destroying the breeding colonies. Today, the islands are protected, accessible only to researchers who document one of the ocean's most important wildlife refuges. Great white sharks patrol these waters in autumn, hunting the elephant seals that breed on the rocky shores. The concentration of sharks is so reliable that researchers call the waters between the Farallones and Point Reyes the Shark Triangle. Yet just 30 miles away, tourists photograph the Golden Gate Bridge, unaware of this wild archipelago where nature rules with prehistoric authority. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta spreads across California's interior like a liquid labyrinth, where 1,100 square miles of waterways wind between islands that shouldn't exist. Many of these islands lie 25 feet below sea level, protected from flooding only by levees built more than a century ago by Chinese laborers who piled mud and tule reeds into barriers against the patient water. This inverted world, where you look up to see water, exists because farmers in the 1800s drained peat marshes to create farmland, but the exposed peat oxidized and disappeared into the atmosphere, causing the land to sink year after year. Today, driving through the Delta feels like navigating an M.C. Escher drawing. Roads run atop levees, while farms spread below. Boats float past at eye level, and the horizon bends in ways that confuse the mind. The Delta serves as the switchboard for California's water, where rivers from the Sierra Nevada meet tidal waters from San Francisco Bay, creating the largest estuary on the western coast of the Americas. Yet this crucial landscape remains precarious, one earthquake or flood away from catastrophic failure that would transform California's water system overnight. Lassen Peak stands at the southern end of the Cascade Range, marking where California's volcanic personality shifts from the explosive stratovolcanoes of the north to the sprawling volcanic fields of the south. Between 1914 and 1917, this seemingly dormant mountain reminded California of its violent potential, erupting more than 180 times and sending ash clouds 30,000 feet into the atmosphere. The eruption of May 22, 1915, was particularly dramatic. A pyroclastic flow raced down the mountain's northeast flank, melting snow and creating a mud flow that devastated everything in its path for 20 miles downstream. Trees were snapped like matchsticks, and the blast zone remained barren for decades. Today, the mountain sleeps again, but steam vents and boiling mud pots at Bumpass Hell and Sulphur Works remind visitors that this is merely an intermission. The geothermal features paint the landscape in unlikely colors: yellow sulfur deposits, red oxidized iron, white silica terraces, creating an artist's palette rendered in minerals. The mountain's eruption cycle, roughly every 600 years, means it could sleep for centuries more, or it could awaken tomorrow. The Klamath Mountains unfold across northwestern California like pages from Earth's oldest diary, containing rocks 400 to 500 million years old that predate the Sierra Nevada by hundreds of millions of years. These ancient mountains host the most diverse conifer forests in the world, where 30 species of conifers grow in a single region, more than in all of eastern North America. This botanical richness exists because the Klamaths served as a refuge during ice ages, a place where species could retreat and survive while glaciers scoured surrounding lands. The mountains are actually several different terrains, pieces of ocean floor and island arcs that collided with North America over millions of years, creating a geological crazy quilt of different rock types. In the Marble Mountains wilderness, white marble cliffs rise above dark forests, the remains of ancient coral reefs that formed in tropical seas and somehow ended up in Northern California. The complexity of the geology creates a corresponding complexity in ecosystems, serpentine soils that few plants can tolerate, pocket gardens of rare endemic species, and rivers that run emerald green through gorges carved from jade-like serpentinite. Owens Valley stretches between the Sierra Nevada and the White Mountains like a geological trench, one of Earth's deepest valleys, though you'd never know it standing on its floor. The valley bottom lies 10,000 feet below the surrounding peaks, but erosion and sediment have filled much of this depression, hiding its true depth beneath thousands of feet of sand and gravel washed down from the mountains. This massive gorge formed as the Earth's crust stretched and broke, dropping the valley floor while raising the mountains on either side, a process that continues today, widening the valley by millimeters each year. The Los Angeles Aqueduct snakes through this valley, carrying water that once supported vast wetlands and Owens Lake, now mostly a dry salt flat that creates toxic dust storms. Before the water diversions, Owens Lake was 12 miles wide and 200 feet deep, supporting millions of migratory birds. Now, on windy days, the exposed lake bed sends alkali dust clouds 40,000 feet into the atmosphere, creating the worst particulate pollution in the United States. California's coastline, when measured with all its intricate bays, inlets, and river mouths, extends 3,427 miles, longer than the entire eastern seaboard from Maine to Florida. This extraordinary length comes from the coast's remarkable complexity, where every headland creates a new bay, every river mouth forms an estuary, and sea stacks dot the shore like punctuation marks in an endless sentence. The coastline changes character dramatically from north to south, from the fog-shrouded redwood coast where ferns grow to the edge of black sand beaches, to the Mediterranean climate of the central coast where monarchs cluster in eucalyptus groves, to the desert meeting the sea in the south where cacti grow within sight of waves. This variety exists because California's coast spans 10 degrees of latitude and hosts multiple climate zones, ocean currents, and geological provinces. The coast is also actively evolving, rising in some places, subsiding in others, constantly reshaped by waves, earthquakes, and landslides that can move entire hillsides into the sea overnight. The Carrizo Plain spreads across San Luis Obispo County like California's hidden heartland, preserving the largest remaining native grassland in the state across 250,000 acres. Called California's Serengeti for its vast open spaces and grazing herds, the plain offers a glimpse of what the Central Valley looked like before agriculture transformed it. In spring, if winter rains have been generous, the plain explodes with wildflowers in such abundance that the valley floor becomes a solid carpet of gold, purple, and orange visible from space. The plain follows the San Andreas Fault for 50 miles, and the fault's presence is unmistakable. A straight valley runs through the grassland where streams make right-angle turns, offset by thousands of years of earthquake movement. Thule elk and pronghorn antelope have been reintroduced here, grazing alongside the endangered San Joaquin kit fox and giant kangaroo rat. At night, with no cities for 50 miles in any direction, The plain offers some of California's darkest skies, where the Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon above grasslands that wave in the wind like an ancient sea. Beneath the resort town of Mammoth Lakes lies a sleeping giant, the Long Valley Caldera, a 20-mile-wide volcanic depression formed by an eruption 760,000 years ago that ejected 150 cubic miles of material, enough to bury California under 8 feet of ash. The eruption was 2,000 times larger than Mount St. Helens, creating a blast that was heard around the world and sending ash as far as Nebraska. Today, the caldera appears deceptively peaceful, filled with forests and meadows, but it remains very much alive. Since 1980, the caldera floor has risen more than 2 feet, pushed up by fresh magma moving beneath the surface. Carbon dioxide seeps from the ground in concentrations high enough to kill trees, creating ghost forests of white skeletal trunks. Hot springs bubble at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and earthquake swarms, sometimes thousands of small quakes in a matter of days, regularly remind residents that they live inside one of North America's most dangerous volcanoes. Yet people continue to build homes and ski resorts here, drawn by the mountain beauty, seemingly unconcerned that they're living inside a volcano that could erupt again. The Santa Ana winds descend from the high desert like California's seasonal madness, transforming the typically mild coastal climate into something alien and unsettling. These winds begin innocently enough as high-pressure systems over the Great Basin, but as they flow toward the coast, they're forced through mountain passes where they accelerate to 100 miles per hour. The compression heats the air dramatically. For every 1,000 feet of descent, the temperature rises 5 degrees Fahrenheit, while simultaneously dropping the humidity to near zero. By the time these winds reach the coast, they're hot, dry, and moving, with enough force to knock down power lines, uproot trees, and turn the smallest spark into a wildfire. Raymond Chandler wrote that the Santa Ana winds make people act strangely, that meek little wives feel the edge of the carving knife and study their husbands' necks. There's something unsettling about warm winds in the night, about palm fronds rattling like bones, about the way the air itself seems to crackle with static electricity and suppressed violence. Alcatraz Island rises from San Francisco Bay like a memory of the Earth's different moods, carved by ancient river currents when this was not a bay, but a valley. During the Ice Ages, when sea levels dropped 400 feet, the combined Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers flowed past this rocky outcrop on their way to the distant ocean. The rivers carved and sculpted the island's sandstone, creating the distinctive shape that would later make it perfect for a fortress and prison. The indigenous Ohlone people avoided the island, calling it a place of evil spirits, perhaps sensing something inhospitable in its barren rocks and screaming birds. Later, it became America's Devil's Island, a prison from which escape was considered impossible, not because of walls or guards, but because of geography, surrounded by waters so cold and currents so strong that even strong swimmers would succumb within minutes. Yet the island was always more than a prison. It hosts the West Coast's oldest operating lighthouse, and today, its abandoned cells are colonized by cormorants and gulls who care nothing for human drama. The transverse ranges break California's geographic rules, running east-west in a state where mountain ranges are supposed to run north-south. This rebellious orientation exists because the Pacific Plate has been rotating clockwise over the past several million years, like a massive hand on a clock, twisting these mountains into their current alignment. The ranges include the Santa Monica, San Gabriel, and San Bernardino Mountains, creating a wall that separates coastal Southern California from the interior deserts. This unusual orientation affects everything: weather patterns, plant communities, even human settlement. The mountains trap marine moisture on their south faces while creating rain shadows to the north, compress Santa Ana winds into fierce channels, and force earthquake faults to bend and twist in complex patterns. The rotation continues today, measurable with GPS satellites, slowly turning these mountains like a door closing on the Mojave Desert. In another few million years, they may complete their rotation to run north-south like proper California mountains should. Clear Lake spreads across Lake County like a piece of ancient California that refused to disappear, persisting in the same location for at least 480,000 years while ice ages came and went, making it the oldest lake in North America. Most lakes are temporary features, filling with sediment or draining away within thousands of years. But Clear Lake endures through a unique combination of geology and climate. The lake sits in a basin created by faulting and volcanic activity, constantly renewed by uplift that keeps pace with sedimentation. Core samples from the lake bottom contain 500,000 years of continuous sediment, each layer a page in California's climate diary. The lake has survived droughts that emptied most other water bodies, volcanic eruptions that filled the air with ash, and earthquakes that reshuffled the surrounding landscape. Native Pomo peoples lived along its shores for over 10,000 years, leaving behind some of the oldest known human settlements in California. Despite its name, Clear Lake is often murky with algae blooms, a natural condition in this nutrient-rich water body that supports enormous populations of fish and birds. The Tehachapi Mountains bridge the gap between the Sierra Nevada and Coast Ranges like a geographic hyphen, connecting two completely different mountain systems into a continuous barrier. This linking range creates one of the world's great wind corridors, where air masses forced through Tehachapi Pass accelerate to speeds that now power 5,000 wind turbines. The wind here is so reliable that the Tehachapi Pass wind farm generates enough electricity to power 500,000 homes. The mountains mark multiple boundaries between the Central Valley and Mojave Desert, between northern and southern California climates, between areas of winter and summer rainfall. The Pacific Crest Trail crosses here, and hikers experience the transition from Sierra granite to desert sandstone in a single day's walk. The range's unique position also makes it a biological crossroads where species from 4 different ecosystems meet and mingle: Sierran forests, coastal scrub, Central Valley grasslands, and Mojave Desert communities all converge in these mountains, creating unexpected combinations of plants and animals found nowhere else. Catalina Island's interior mountains hide deposits of soapstone that tell a story of 8,000 years of human industry and trade. The island's steatite, or soapstone, is unusually pure and easy to carve, making it perfect for bowls, pipes, and ceremonial objects. The indigenous Tongva people quarried this stone and traded it throughout Southern California and beyond, with Catalina soapstone found at archaeological sites as far away as central Arizona and northern Mexico. The quarries remain visible today, amphitheater-like depressions where thousands of years of extraction removed entire hillsides. The stone formed 150 million years ago in conditions of extreme heat and pressure as the island was being assembled from pieces of oceanic crust. Today, wild bison roam above these ancient quarries, descendants of animals brought for a 1924 movie filming and never removed. The island exists as a fragment of the mainland that rifted away millions of years ago, carrying with it endemic species like the Catalina Island fox and numerous plants found nowhere else on Earth. The Imperial Valley spreads below sea level in California's southeastern corner, a desert transformed into one of the world's most productive agricultural regions, through geographic audacity. Once covered by ancient Lake Cahuilla, which filled and dried repeatedly over thousands of years as the Colorado River changed course, the valley floor now lies up to 235 feet below sea level. This former lake bed contains some of the richest soil in the world. Layers of silt deposited by countless floods, baked by the desert sun into agricultural gold. The transformation required bringing water from the Colorado River through canals that fight gravity, carrying water uphill to fields that produce 80% of America's winter vegetables. The valley exists in constant tension with its geography, too hot for human comfort with summer temperatures regularly exceeding 120 degrees, too dry with less than 3 inches of annual rainfall, too low with parts below sea level, protected only by levees. Yet lettuce grows here in winter when the rest of the country is frozen, and date palms thrive in heat that would kill most crops. California's position on the Ring of Fire means the ground never truly rests, with approximately 10,000 earthquakes occurring annually throughout the state. Most are too small to feel, tiny adjustments as the Pacific and North American plates grind past each other at about the same rate fingernails grow. But this constant minor movement is deceptive. Stress accumulates in locked sections of faults, building toward inevitable release. Seismometers across the state detect this continuous conversation between tectonic plates, a rumbling dialogue mostly below human perception. Only 15 to 20 earthquakes each year exceed magnitude 4.0, strong enough to rattle dishes and remind Californians they live on active ground. The distribution of these quakes maps California's hidden architecture: the San Andreas System, the Eastern California Shear Zone, the Mendocino Triple Junction, each contributing to a symphony of movement that slowly reshapes the state. Some faults haven't moved in centuries, accumulating strain that makes seismologists nervous, while others creep constantly, releasing energy in countless tiny earthquakes that prevent larger ones. Near Medicine Lake Volcano in northeastern California, the Glass Mountain obsidian flow spreads like a frozen Black Sea, 4 square miles of volcanic glass up to 150 feet thick. This massive flow erupted less than 1,000 years ago, geologically yesterday, when rhyolite lava too thick to flow far from its source cooled instantly into natural glass. The obsidian here is exceptionally pure, free of the crystals that usually cloud volcanic glass, creating material so sharp that modern surgeons have experimented with obsidian scalpel blades that can be 100 times sharper than steel. Native peoples traveled hundreds of miles to quarry this obsidian, using it for arrowheads, knives, and ceremonial objects that have been found at archaeological sites throughout Western North America. Walking across the flow is like traversing a broken mirror the size of a city, where every surface reflects sky and clouds in fractured patterns. The glass makes sounds as temperature changes cause it to expand and contract. Clicks, pops, and occasional rifle shot cracks that echo across the flow, as if the volcano is still cooling after all these centuries. Tulare Lake once spread across the southern Central Valley like an inland sea, the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi River at 690 square miles, 4 times the size of Lake Tahoe. Fed by Sierra Nevada rivers during spring snowmelt, the lake would expand to cover vast areas of the valley floor, creating a waterfowl paradise that early explorers described as blackened with millions of ducks, geese, and sandhill cranes. The lake had no outlet, expanding and contracting with the seasons, sometimes disappearing entirely during drought years only to return with wet winters. By 1900, farmers had diverted every river that fed the lake, transforming the lake bed into some of California's most productive farmland. But the lake hasn't forgotten what it was. In extremely wet years like 1969 and 1983, it briefly returns, flooding farms and roads, reclaiming its basin for a few months before the water is pumped away. Beneath the cotton fields and almond orchards, the lakebed sediments contain millions of years of history, fossils of camels and horses, shells from freshwater clams, and tools from indigenous peoples who fished these waters for millennia. The peninsular ranges extend from Los Angeles through San Diego and deep into Baja California, a chain of mountains built from granite batholiths that crystallized 100 million years ago when this was the edge of the continent. These mountains tell the story of California's western migration. As the Pacific Plate scraped northward along North America, it carried ocean floor sediments that piled against the continent's edge, gradually extending the land westward. The granite core of these mountains formed deep underground, identical to the Sierra Nevada granite, but younger, created by the same subduction processes that built California's major mountain ranges. Today, these mountains create the backbone of Southern California, forcing Pacific storms upward to wring out moisture, creating the conditions for chaparral ecosystems that burn regularly and regenerate from fire. From Mount San Jacinto to the mountains of northern Baja, the range maintains remarkable consistency. The same granite, the same fault patterns, the same ecosystems, as if nature used a template to create 900 miles of mountains. Anza Borrego Desert State Park encompasses 600,000 acres of Colorado desert, California's largest state park, where ancient seabeds have been lifted 4,000 feet above sea level and carved into badlands that look like another planet. The rocks here contain the complete story of Southern California's transformation from ocean floor to desert mountains. Marine fossils embedded in canyon walls prove this was once shallow sea, while younger rocks contain bones from mammoths, camels, and giant ground sloths that roamed here when this was grassland. The badlands themselves formed through patient erosion, where rare but violent thunderstorms carve soft sedimentary rocks into fantastic shapes, knife-edge ridges, slot canyons, and hoodoos that seem to defy gravity. After winter rains, the desert explodes with wildflowers in such abundance that the normally tan landscape becomes a painter's palette of purple sand verbena, yellow brittlebush, and hot pink beaver-tail cactus blooms. The park's elevation ranges from 500 feet to 6,000 feet, creating multiple life zones where desert palms grow in oases, while pine trees crown the highest peaks. The Golden Gate Strait forms the only break in California's coastal mountains for 500 miles, a 1-mile-wide gap through which the entire Central Valley's watershed must pass to reach the Pacific. This narrow channel was carved by the combined flow of the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers during ice ages when sea levels were lower and the rivers had to cut through the coastal range to reach the distant ocean. The strait plunges to depths of 300 feet, scoured by tidal currents that race through 4 times daily at speeds reaching 6 knots, powerful enough to sweep away anything not anchored to the bottom. Before the famous bridge spanned it, the strait was considered unbridgeable, too wide, too deep, too violent in its currents and winds. The Spanish called it La Boca del Puerto de San Francisco, the mouth of the port. But early American sailors had another name, the Golden Gate, not for any gold rush association, but for its resemblance to Istanbul's Golden Horn. On foggy mornings, the strait becomes a river of clouds flowing inland, the cold Pacific air pouring through this gap to fill the warming valley beyond. Mount Diablo rises from the East Bay like a pyramid built by geology, an ancient seafloor thrust skyward until it stands nearly 4,000 feet above the surrounding valleys. On exceptionally clear days, typically after winter storms have scrubbed the air clean. The view from Diablo's summit encompasses more of Earth's surface than from any other peak in the world. Over 40,000 square miles of California, spreading in every direction. From here, you can see 35 of California's 58 counties, from the Farallon Islands in the Pacific to the Sierra Nevada, 150 miles east. The mountain is what geologists call a pop-up structure, squeezed upward by converging pressures from the San Andreas and Calaveras faults. Its rocks tell impossible stories. Jurassic ocean floor sits atop younger Cretaceous sandstone, the entire sequence turned upside down by forces that bent rock like taffy. The mountain creates its own weather, often wearing a cap of clouds while surrounding areas bake in sunshine. Native peoples considered it sacred, believing it was the point from which creation began, and watching sunrise from its summit, seeing California emerge from darkness, you can understand why. The Modoc Plateau spreads across California's northeastern corner like a forgotten piece of the state, a volcanic tableland more reminiscent of Oregon or Idaho than typical California. Formed by massive basalt flows between 10 and 30 million years ago, layer upon layer of lava created this high desert plateau studded with over 100 volcanic cones and riddled with lava tube caves. The caves preserve ice year-round, creating natural refrigerators that native peoples used for food storage for thousands of years. Some tubes extend for miles underground, perfect darkness where the temperature never varies, where blind spiders have evolved without eyes, where silence is so complete it becomes a presence. Above ground, the plateau supports vast sagebrush steppes where pronghorn antelope run at 60 miles per hour across landscapes that haven't changed much since the Pleistocene. This is California's empty quarter, where ranches measure in tens of thousands of acres, where you can drive for hours without seeing another vehicle, where the night sky remains unpolluted by artificial light and the Milky Way arches overhead like nature's own cathedral. California's kelp forests rise from the rocky seafloor like underwater rainforests, some reaching heights of 130 feet from bottom to surface, growing up to 2 feet in a single day when conditions are right. These marine forests, anchored by holdfasts that grip rocks with thousands of finger-like projections, create underwater cathedrals where shafts of sunlight filter through the canopy like stained glass. Giant kelp, the world's largest marine algae, forms the architecture of these forests that stretch along 800 miles of California's coast. Each plant can live 7 years, constantly growing from its tip, while older portions break away in storms, sometimes washing ashore in tangled masses after winter swells. The forests support ecosystems as complex as any on land. Sea otters wrap themselves in kelp fronds to sleep, Garibaldi fish defend territories among the stalks, and leopard sharks cruise the shadowy depths. These forests breathe with the tides, swaying in synchronized waves that can be mesmerizing to watch from below, a hypnotic dance that seems choreographed by the ocean itself. The Sierra Nevada batholith lies beneath California like the bones of the earth exposed, a massive body of granite that formed between 150 and 80 million years ago when the Pacific Ocean floor dove beneath North America. This granite foundation, larger than Belgium, crystallized from molten rock miles beneath the surface, cooling slowly enough to form the large crystals that give Sierra granite its distinctive speckled appearance. Over millions of years, erosion stripped away the overlying rock, exposing these plutons to create the Sierra Nevada we see today. The batholith isn't uniform, but consists of hundreds of individual plutons, each slightly different in composition and age, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle assembled over 70 million years. This granite weathers in distinctive ways. Exfoliation creates the massive domes of Yosemite, while jointing patterns determine where valleys and peaks will form. The rock continues to rise, pushed upward by forces we don't fully understand, gaining elevation even as erosion tries to wear it down, maintaining a delicate balance between creation and destruction. Shasta Dam spans the Sacramento River like a concrete mountain, 602 feet high and containing enough concrete to pave a sidewalk around the Earth's equator. Behind this massive wall, California stores 4.5 million acre-feet of water in the state's largest reservoir, a human-made lake that drowns 365 miles of river channel. The dam required moving an entire railroad, relocating whole towns, and flooding sacred sites of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, including burial grounds and ceremonial places used for millennia. When full, the reservoir's weight actually depresses the Earth's crust measurably, and the controlled releases from the dam have completely altered the Sacramento River's natural rhythms. Before the dam, the river ran warm and muddy in summer, cold and clear in winter. Now, it runs cold year-round from water drawn from the reservoir's depths, supporting introduced salmon and trout, but eliminating native fish adapted to the original conditions. The dam represents California's relationship with water in concrete form, the attempt to control, store, and redistribute what nature provides unevenly across space and time. The Garlock Fault stretches 160 miles along the northern edge of the Mojave Desert, a sleeping giant that hasn't produced a major earthquake in over 500 years, despite accumulating tremendous strain. This left lateral fault, moving opposite to the more famous right lateral San Andreas, forms the geological boundary between the Mojave Desert and the Basin and Range Province. Scientists studying the fault have found evidence of massive prehistoric earthquakes, some possibly exceeding magnitude 8.0, that occurred regularly every 200 to 700 years. The fault's current quiet period, the longest in its recorded history, makes seismologists nervous. The accumulated strain must eventually release. When it does move, computer models suggest it could trigger earthquakes on other faults, potentially setting off a cascade of seismic events across Southern California. The fault zone is visible from space as a straight line crossing the desert, marked by offset streams, pressure ridges, and sag ponds that fill with water after rare desert rains. Along its length, the fault has created unusual geology: hot springs, mineral deposits, and zones where different rock types have been ground together into geological melange. Joshua Tree National Park sits at the convergence of two deserts, the Mojave and the Colorado, each with its own character, creating a meeting place of ecosystems at elevations ranging from 536 to nearly 6,000 feet. The Joshua trees themselves, those twisted Dr. Seuss characters of the plant world, grow only in the higher Mojave portion, where freezing temperatures provide the dormancy period their seeds need to germinate. These aren't actually trees, but giant yuccas that can live for centuries, growing barely an inch per year, their branches reaching toward the sky in gestures that seem almost animate. Below them, in the Colorado desert section, the landscape transforms into a different world. Ocotillos wave their thorny wands, smoke trees create gray hazes in sandy washes, and chala cacti glow backlit by desert sun. The park's famous rock formations, massive granite boulders stacked like giants' toys, formed underground as molten rock cooled and cracked. Erosion later exposed these rocks, and weathering along the crack lines created the rounded forms that make the park a playground for rock climbers from around the world. Cache Creek watershed drains some of the most mercury-contaminated land in the world, a toxic legacy from both natural deposits and gold rush mining. The creek carries more mercury to San Francisco Bay than any other tributary, the heavy metal moving in pulses during winter storms when sediment washes from abandoned mines and naturally mineralized areas. The mercury comes from the Coast Range's unusual geology. Serpentine rocks formed on ancient ocean floors contain cinnabar, mercury sulfide ore, that Spanish colonists and later American miners extracted to process gold. At the abandoned Reed Mine, rainbow-sheened pools still seep mercury-laden water 150 years after mining ceased. Fish in Cache Creek contain mercury levels so high that health officials warn against eating them, and predators like herons and otters show signs of mercury poisoning. Yet the creek also supports remarkable biodiversity, including rare native fish species that somehow persist in these contaminated waters. The watershed demonstrates how geology determines destiny, the rocks beneath our feet influencing everything from human history to the chemistry of our food chain. California contains 420 publicly recognized mountain ranges and subranges, more than any other state except Alaska, a geographic complexity that makes the state a sort of continental accordion, compressed and folded into endless ridges and valleys. These ranges formed through different processes at different times, some thrust up by compression, others pulled apart by extension, some built by volcanoes, others carved by erosion. The Coast Ranges alone comprise dozens of smaller ranges, each with its own name and character, from the King Range of the Lost Coast to the Santa Lucia Mountains of Big Sur. The Sierra Nevada, though often spoken of as a single range, actually consists of multiple parallel ridges separated by deep valleys. This mountain diversity creates California's varied climates. Each range captures moisture differently, creates unique rain shadows, channels winds in particular ways. The biological richness follows the geological complexity. Isolated peaks become sky islands, where unique species evolve. Valleys between ranges serve as migration corridors or barriers, and the varied elevations create multiple life zones stacked atop each other, like ecological layer cakes. The Sonoran Desert extends its northernmost finger into California's southeastern corner, bringing with it the continent's most biologically diverse desert ecosystem. Though it covers only 28,000 square miles of California, this desert hosts 60 mammal species, 350 bird species, and 2,000 plant species, a richness that rivals many rainforests. This diversity exists because the Sonoran receives rain twice yearly, winter storms from the Pacific and summer monsoons from the Gulf of California, creating two growing seasons that support both winter and summer plant communities. The desert's signature saguaro cacti barely enter California, reaching their northwestern limit near the Colorado River. But other Sonoran specialists thrive here. Ironwood trees that live for 1,000 years, providing nurse plants for 165 other species. Elephant trees with papery bark and blood-red sap. Boojum trees that look like inverted carrots stretching 50 feet skyward. The desert pulses with hidden life. Kangaroo rats that never drink water, getting all moisture from seeds. Sidewinders that move across sand, leaving J-shaped tracks. Desert pupfish that survive in water 3 times saltier than the ocean. Yosemite Valley was carved by glaciers like a sculptor working granite, creating a 7-mile-long canyon surrounded by cliffs that rise 3,000 feet from the valley floor. During the ice ages, glaciers up to 4,000 feet thick filled this valley, grinding away at the granite, plucking huge blocks from cliff faces, polishing surfaces to mirror smoothness. When the ice finally retreated 10,000 years ago, it left behind a landscape of superlatives, North America's tallest waterfall, sheer granite cliffs that challenge climbers from around the world, and a valley floor so flat it once held a lake. The valley's shape tells the story of its creation. The U-shaped cross-section classic of glacial valleys, the hanging valleys where tributary glaciers couldn't cut as deep as the main ice river, the glacial polish still visible on cliff faces that reflect sunlight like ancient mirrors. Half Dome, the valley's most iconic feature, isn't actually half of anything, but rather a granite dome, whose northwest face was quarried away by glaciers along vertical joint plains, creating one of the most recognizable silhouettes in nature. The Eel River delivers more sediment per square mile of drainage area to the ocean than any other river in the continental United States, a muddy torrent that colors the Pacific brown for miles offshore during winter storms. This extraordinary sediment load comes from the river's path through the fractured, unstable rocks of the coast ranges, where landslides regularly dump entire hillsides into the channel. The river's name comes not from eels, but from Pacific lampreys, primitive fish that native peoples harvested for thousands of years. The eel's watershed encompasses some of California's most unstable terrain, where tectonic forces have shattered rocks into fragments that erode at rates visible year to year. During the Christmas flood of 1964, the river carried an estimated 100 million tons of sediment to the sea in just a few days. This constant erosion creates problems downstream, but also builds beaches, nourishes coastal ecosystems, and maintains the sediment supply that keeps California's northern beaches from disappearing into the ocean. The San Joaquin Valley has been sinking for decades, subsiding up to 30 feet in some areas as farmers pump groundwater from aquifers faster than rain can replenish them. This subsidence affects over 5,200 square miles of irrigated farmland, creating a slow-motion geological disaster that cracks roads, breaks water pipes, and changes the gradient of irrigation canals. The land sinks unevenly, creating bowls and depressions where none existed before, forcing engineers to constantly rebuild infrastructure designed for a landscape that no longer exists. In some places, you can see the evidence directly. Power poles that once stood at equal heights now step down into subsidence bowls. Bridges that once cleared irrigation canals now nearly touch the water. The aquifer being drained took thousands of years to fill. Water from Ice Age rains stored in underground gravel layers. Once the pore spaces collapse from the weight above, they can never be refilled. The storage capacity is permanently lost. It's a one-way geological process, trading ancient water for contemporary crops. The Warner Mountains rise in California's remote northeast corner, the westernmost range of the Basin and Range Province, a fault block mountain chain that belongs more to Nevada than California. These mountains, reaching 9,992 feet at Eagle Peak, were thrust upward along massive faults while adjacent valleys dropped, creating a landscape of parallel ridges and basins that extends across the Great Basin. The Warners catch Pacific moisture that rarely reaches Nevada, supporting forests of aspen and pine in what would otherwise be desert. In autumn, the aspens turn gold in synchronized waves, entire hillsides transforming overnight as if painted by an unseen hand. The mountains harbor California's most remote wilderness areas, places where you can walk for days without crossing a road or seeing another person. Hidden valleys contain remnant populations of native trout in streams that haven't been stocked with hatchery fish, where beaver dams create chains of pools reflecting peaks and sky. From high ridges, you can see into 3 states, across a basin and range landscape that repeats to the horizon like frozen waves. Pinnacles. National Park preserves half of an ancient volcano, the other half lying 195 miles to the southeast on the opposite side of the San Andreas Fault. 23 million years ago, this volcano erupted where Los Angeles now stands, but the Pacific Plate has carried the western half northward along the fault at an average rate of 1.5 inches per year. The park's spectacular rock formations, towering spires, sheer walls, and boulder caves formed as volcanic breccia eroded into fantastic shapes. The caves here weren't carved by water, but created by massive boulders wedging together as narrow gorges filled with rockfall, creating passages where California's largest bat colonies now roost. 13 species of bats inhabit these caves, including colonies of 10,000 Townsend's big-eared bats that emerge at dusk in clouds that spiral into the evening sky. The park demonstrates the San Andreas Fault's power not through destruction, but through transportation, carrying half a volcano hundreds of miles from its origin, a geological magic trick performed over millions of years. The Coachella Valley's underground aquifer holds an estimated 39 million acre-feet of water, an underground sea beneath one of America's driest deserts. This ancient water, accumulated over thousands of years, fills spaces between sand and gravel layers deposited when the climate was wetter and rivers flowed where only dust devils spin today. The aquifer extends 65 miles from the San Bernardino Mountains to the Salton Sea, reaching depths of 2,000 feet. Above this hidden reservoir, palm oases mark fault lines where earthquakes have cracked the impermeable cap rock, allowing water to seep upward and support California's only native palm trees. These desert fan palms cluster around springs and seeps, their presence indicating water just as surely as divining rods. The aquifer made possible the transformation of the Coachella Valley from desert to agricultural empire and sprawling resort cities. Though water levels drop each year as extraction exceeds recharge, it's a resource accumulated over millennia being spent in decades. Ancient water financing contemporary dreams. California's continental shelf extends underwater like a drowned landscape, stretching 20 miles from shore in the north, but narrowing to barely a mile in parts of the south. This underwater plain, the submerged edge of the continent, was dry land during ice ages when mammoths and saber-toothed cats roamed where fish now swim. The shelf's width determines everything from wave patterns to marine ecosystems. The wide northern shelf dissipates storm energy, creating gentler shores, while the narrow southern shelf allows deep water waves to strike the coast with full force. Submarine canyons cut through the shelf like underwater river valleys, some rivaling the Grand Canyon in scale. The Monterey Canyon begins just offshore from Moss Landing, cutting so close to shore that its head lies in water shallow enough to wade in before plunging to depths exceeding 12,000 feet. These canyons funnel nutrients from shallow to deep water, creating upwelling zones that support California's incredible marine productivity. Gray whales navigate along the shelf edge during migrations, following this underwater highway between Alaska and Mexico. Medicine Lake Volcano sprawls across 900 square miles of northeastern California, the state's largest volcano by volume at 150 cubic miles of lava and ash. Unlike the photogenic cone of Mount Shasta visible to the west, Medicine Lake is a shield volcano, built by countless fluid lava flows that created a broad, gently sloped mountain, more like Hawaii's volcanoes than the Cascades' typical peaks. The volcano has erupted at least 17 times in the last 13,000 years, most recently about 950 years ago, making it one of California's most active volcanoes. Its summit caldera, 7 by 4 miles wide, contains Medicine Lake itself, where native peoples came to seek visions and spiritual power. The volcano's diverse eruption history created a geological wonderland. Pumice fields so pure and white they resemble snow, obsidian flows that provided tool material for native peoples across the West, and lava tube caves that preserve ice year-round. Some tubes are decorated with lava sickles, frozen drips of once molten rock that hang like stone icicles from cave ceilings. The San Gabriel Mountains rise faster than erosion can wear them away, gaining elevation at 2 millimeters per year as compression between tectonic plates squeezes them skyward. These mountains, forming the backdrop to Los Angeles, are among the fastest growing ranges on Earth, their rapid rise creating extreme topography. Slopes so steep that rock slides are constant, canyons so narrow that floods can raise water levels 30 feet in minutes. The mountain's youth shows in their sharp ridges and V-shaped canyons, landscapes not yet softened by millions of years of erosion. This rapid uplift exposes rocks from deep in the Earth's crust, bringing to the surface formations that would normally be buried miles deep. The range catches Pacific storms and wrings them dry, creating precipitation gradients where rainfall can vary from 15 to 40 inches within a few miles. After fires remove vegetation, winter rains trigger debris flows that can move house-sized boulders, reshape canyon bottoms overnight, and deliver millions of tons of sediment to the valleys below, continuing the eternal process of mountain building and destruction. Searles Lake spreads across the Mojave Desert floor like a memory of water, now a vast expanse of mineral-crusted earth that once held a lake 640 feet deep during the last ice age. This dry lakebed, covering 385 square miles, preserves the story of climate change written in crystallized minerals, layers of salt, borax, and potash that precipitated out as the ancient lake slowly evaporated over thousands of years. During the Pleistocene, a chain of lakes connected the Owens Valley to Death Valley, with Searles Lake serving as one link in this watery corridor through what is now desert. Today, the lakebed is mined for minerals, producing a significant portion of the world's supply of industrial minerals from the concentrated remains of an Ice Age lake. After rare heavy rains, parts of the lakebed briefly fill with a few inches of water, creating temporary mirrors that reflect desert mountains in perfect clarity. The surrounding slate range contains petroglyphs carved by people who lived here when the lake was full. They're rock art depicting water birds that haven't been seen here for 10,000 years. California's Redwood National and State Parks protect the tallest living things on Earth, trees that can reach 379 feet into the fog, taller than the Statue of Liberty, including its pedestal. These coast redwoods create their own weather, combing moisture from Pacific fog with specialized needles that channel water droplets down to roots that spread wider than the tree is tall, but penetrate only 10 to 13 feet deep. Some of these giants have lived for 2,000 years, surviving because their bark, up to a foot thick and lacking flammable resin, resists the fires that clear out competing vegetation. Walking among them is like entering a living cathedral where sounds are muffled by the thick carpet of needles, and the air itself seems green with filtered light. The trees support entire ecosystems in their canopies, salamanders that never touch the ground, flying squirrels that glide between trunks, gardens of ferns and huckleberries growing in soil accumulated on massive branches. These aerial gardens can hold enough soil to support trees growing on trees, hemlocks and tan oaks, sprouting from redwood limbs 200 feet above the ground. The Hayward Fault runs beneath the East Bay cities like a sleeping dragon, passing directly under houses, schools, and hospitals from Richmond to Fremont. Scientists studying this fault have discovered it produces major earthquakes with disturbing regularity, approximately every 140 years. and the last one was in 1868, making the next one overdue by decades. The fault creeps constantly in some sections, moving about 5 millimeters per year, slowly offsetting curbs, cracking foundations, and bending the walls of the Memorial Stadium at UC Berkeley, which was built directly across the fault line. This creeping actually releases some strain, but not enough to prevent major earthquakes. When the fault does rupture, models suggest the shaking will last 40 seconds or longer, with the potential to collapse older buildings, break water mains, and sever transportation links across the Bay Area. The fault zone is visible in the Berkeley Hills as a linear valley where streams have eroded the crushed rock, creating a natural boulevard that native peoples used as a trail long before geologists understood why this convenient route existed. Point Conception juts into the Pacific like a geographic punctuation mark, the place where California's coast makes its dramatic turn from north-south to east-west. This headland creates one of the most important marine boundaries in the eastern Pacific, where the cold California current from the north meets warmer waters from the south, creating a biological mixing zone of extraordinary richness. The point acts like a gate between two different oceans. To the north, cold water species like rockfish and sea otters dominate, while to the south, warmer water species like California, sheephead, and spiny lobsters become common. The Chumash people called this place the Western Gate, believing it was where souls departed for the afterlife, traveling to the Channel Islands visible on clear days. The waters off Point Conception are notorious among mariners for confused seas where different swell patterns collide, creating waves that seem to come from all directions at once. This oceanographic chaos supports exceptional marine productivity. The mixing of water masses brings nutrients to the surface, feeding plankton blooms that support everything from anchovies to blue whales. The Trinity Alps rise from northwestern California's Klamath Mountains like misplaced pieces of the Sierra Nevada, their white granite peaks and glacial valleys seeming to belong 200 miles to the east. Yet these mountains formed through entirely different processes 150 million years ago. Their granite intruded during a separate episode of subduction when this region was offshore islands in the ancient Pacific. The Alps contain California's second-largest wilderness area, where lakes named after precious stones, sapphire, emerald, diamond, nestle in granite basins carved by glaciers that persisted here longer than almost anywhere else in California. The mountains create their own weather, wringing 80 inches of precipitation from Pacific storms, feeding rivers that run clear as glass over granite bedrock. The botanical diversity here exceeds anywhere else in California. 38 species of conifers grow in the Greater Trinity region, adapted to serpentine soils, granite outcrops, and the complex topography that creates countless microclimates. Black bears here have learned to fish for salmon like their Alaskan cousins, and the mountains provide one of the last strongholds for the elusive Pacific fisher. Soda Lake spreads across the Carrizo Plain during wet winters, the largest remaining alkali wetland in Southern California, transforming from cracked earth to shallow sea in matters of days after heavy rains. This ephemeral lake, covering up to 3,000 acres when full, attracts thousands of migrating sandhill cranes whose trumpeting calls echo across the plain like sounds from the Pleistocene. The lake has no outlet, concentrating salts and minerals as water evaporates, creating conditions so alkaline that only specialized organisms can survive. Brine shrimp, alkali flies, and bacteria that paint the water in shades of red and green. When dry, the lake bed becomes a canvas of white mineral deposits, polygonal mud cracks, and the tracks of animals that venture across its surface. The lake's cycles follow California's irregular rainfall, absent for years during droughts, then suddenly reappearing to reclaim its basin, as if the landscape itself has memory. Native peoples gathered salt here for trade, and later settlers attempted to mine the mineral deposits. But the lake's unpredictable nature defeated most commercial efforts. California's submarine canyons plunge into darkness off the continental shelf, underwater gorges that rival terrestrial canyons in scale, but exceed them in mystery. These canyons, carved by turbidity currents, underwater avalanches of sediment-laden water, funnel nutrients from shallow to deep waters, creating upwelling zones that support the ocean's most productive ecosystems. Some canyons begin so close to shore that their heads lie in diveable depths, then plunge to abyssal depths within miles. The canyons serve as highways for marine life. Deep water species rise along canyon walls to feed, while gray whales use them as navigation markers during migrations. Instruments lowered into these canyons have recorded turbidity currents moving at 40 miles per hour, carrying millions of tons of sediment from the continental shelf to the deep ocean. The canyons are constantly evolving, their walls collapsing in underwater landslides, their channels shifting course, continuing the erosion that began millions of years ago when sea levels were lower and rivers flowed directly into them. The Santa Clara Valley, now known as Silicon Valley, has sunk 14 feet since 1910 as technology companies built their campuses atop land subsiding from groundwater extraction. This subsidence affects 250 square miles, creating a bowl deepest near San Jose, where a century of pumping has collapsed the aquifer's structure. The sinking was first noticed when orchardists found their carefully graded irrigation systems no longer worked. Water flowed uphill according to the original surveys. Railroad tracks buckled, bridges had to be raised, and flood control channels designed with specific gradients no longer drained properly. The subsidence slowed after surface water imports began in the 1960s, but the damage was permanent. The collapsed aquifer spaces can never be restored. Today's tech workers walk on land that has dropped more than a story since their industry's birth, an invisible monument to resource extraction that preceded silicon chips. The valley demonstrates how human activity becomes geological force, reshaping landscapes not over millions of years, but within human lifespans. Devil's Postpile rises from the forest floor near Mammoth Lakes like a giant's pipe organ, 60-foot tall columns of basalt so uniform they seem artificially carved. These hexagonal columns formed 82,000 years ago when a lava flow pooled 400 feet deep in a valley, then cooled slowly and evenly from top to bottom. As the basalt cooled, it contracted and cracked in a hexagonal pattern, nature's most efficient way to release stress, creating columns that are perpendicular to the cooling surface. The top of the formation, accessible by trail, reveals the column's cross-sections polished smooth by glaciers, looking like a tile floor designed by geometry itself. Some columns curve slightly, recording subtle changes in cooling direction, while others lie in jumbled piles where earthquakes or frost have toppled them. The formation was nearly destroyed in the early 1900s when it was proposed as a dam site, saved only when it became a national monument. Rain and snowmelt have carved deep grooves between columns, creating miniature slot canyons where water has exploited the weakness between these stone pillars. Big Sur's coastline rises from the Pacific in the steepest coastal gradient in the continental United States, mountains climbing 5,000 feet within 3 miles of the shore. This extreme topography exists where the Santa Lucia Mountains meet the ocean without the courtesy of coastal plains or terraces, creating a landscape that seems to belong more to fantasy than reality. The steepness makes the coast almost impossible to develop. Highway 1 clings precariously to cliff sides, closed regularly by landslides that send entire sections tumbling into the ocean. The mountains are still rising, pushed upward by tectonic compression, while waves undercut their bases, creating a vertical battlefield between earth and sea. Morning fog pours through canyon mouths like slow-motion waterfalls, while condors ride thermals up mountain faces that rise directly from the surf. The gradient creates extreme microclimates, redwood groves in canyon bottoms, while chaparral bakes on ridges just yards away, snow on peaks, while beaches below bask in sunshine. This compressed landscape concentrates life into narrow zones, creating extraordinary biodiversity in minimal space. The Surprise Valley lies hidden in California's northeastern corner, a closed basin where water has no escape to the sea, evaporating or seeping underground in an endless cycle of accumulation and loss. This 50-mile-long valley, hemmed in by the Warner Mountains to the west and Nevada Mountains to the east, contains 3 alkali lakes that expand and contract with the seasons, sometimes merging into one large lake, sometimes disappearing entirely. The valley floor contains evidence of ancient Lake Surprise, which filled the basin to depths of 500 feet during the Pleistocene, leaving beach terraces etched on mountainsides far above the current valley floor. Today, the valley supports cattle ranches that depend on springs fed by mountain snowmelt, creating green oases in an otherwise austere landscape. The isolation is complete. One road enters from California, another from Nevada, and between them lies a valley that seems forgotten by time. Hot springs bubble along fault lines, their mineral deposits creating terraces of travertine that look like frozen waterfalls. Angel Island rises from San Francisco Bay as a geological puzzle, assembled from at least 5 different terrains, pieces of Earth's crust that formed in different places at different times and were brought together by tectonic forces. The island's rocks tell impossible stories. Pillow basalts formed on ancient ocean floors sit next to sandstones deposited in long-vanished rivers, while serpentine from the Earth's mantle weathers into soil that supports rare plants found nowhere else. Each terrain arrived at a different time over the past 200 million years, carried by plate tectonics and assembled through collisions that folded, faulted, and metamorphosed rocks into complex patterns. The island served as the Ellis Island of the West, but its human history is brief compared to its geological journey. From the island's summit, you can see the Golden Gate, the bridge spanning the same tectonic boundary that created the island's complex geology. The island continues to move northward with the Pacific Plate, adding another chapter to its already complicated geological biography. The Colorado River once reached the Gulf of California carrying red sediment that gave it its name, but since the 1960s, not a drop of river water has naturally completed this journey. Every gallon is diverted for agriculture and cities, the river disappearing into canals and aqueducts before reaching its delta. The former delta, once covering 2 million acres of wetlands in Mexico and California, has become one of the most dramatic examples of ecosystem collapse in North America. Where millions of birds once nested in vast marshes, salt flats now stretch to the horizon. The river's absence has allowed seawater to intrude far inland, changing soil chemistry and killing what vegetation remained. Yet during extremely wet years, when reservoirs fill and water must be released, the river briefly remembers its path to the sea. These rare flows trigger explosions of life in the delta. Dormant seeds germinate, birds arrive by the thousands, and for a few weeks, the desert becomes a wetland again, demonstrating nature's patience and resilience. California's basin and range region stretches across the state's eastern edge, containing over 150 mountain ranges separated by valleys in a pattern that from space resembles waves frozen in rock. This landscape formed as the Earth's crust stretched and thinned, breaking into blocks that tilted like dominoes, creating parallel ranges and valleys extending from the Sierra Nevada to Utah. Each valley tells the same story: a dropped block of crust filled with thousands of feet of sediment eroded from adjacent mountains, hiding the true depth of these basins. Some valleys contain playas, dry lakes that fill temporarily after storms, their surfaces becoming mirrors reflecting mountains and sky before the water disappears into the desert air. The ranges rise like islands from sage-covered valley floors, each supporting different life zones based on elevation: desert scrub at the base, pinyon juniper woodlands on the slopes, and sometimes pine forests on the highest peaks, biological islands separated by seas of sand and sage. Amboy Crater rises from the Mojave Desert floor as one of California's youngest volcanic features, a nearly perfect cinder cone that erupted just 500 years ago. The crater, 250 feet high and 1,500 feet across, looks so fresh it seems like the eruption just ended, with black basalt flows spreading across the desert like spilled ink. Climbing to the rim reveals a bowl-shaped interior where volcanic bombs, blobs of lava that cooled while flying through the air, lie scattered like prehistoric eggs. The crater formed through a strombolian eruption, relatively gentle by volcanic standards, building the cone through thousands of small explosions that threw lava fragments into the air. The surrounding lava field preserves detailed flow patterns, including pei-ho-ho ropes and pressure ridges that look like waves frozen in stone. Despite the harsh environment, life colonizes the volcanic rocks. Desert holly grows in crevices where moisture collects, and lizards bask on black rocks that absorb and radiate heat. The crater sits beside Route 66, a geological youngster watching the human highway that itself now seems ancient. The Russian River performs a geographical dance unique among California's waterways, reversing course twice in its 110-mile journey to the sea. The river begins flowing south from its Mendocino County headwaters, then abruptly turns west at Healdsburg, flowing through a gorge to the coast, but not before turning south again near Guerneville. This peculiar path results from stream capture. The river once flowed south to San Francisco Bay, but coastal streams eroding headward through weaker rocks captured it, redirecting its flow to the Pacific. The evidence remains in the Alexander Valley, where the river flows through a valley too large for it to have carved, inheriting a landscape shaped by larger, ancient rivers. During winter floods, the river remembers its wild nature, spreading across its historic floodplain despite human attempts at control. The river supports one of California's last runs of coho salmon, fish that navigate the river's unusual course by instinct encoded over thousands of generations. Death Valley's moving rocks remained one of geology's most puzzling mysteries until recently. Stones weighing up to 700 pounds that slide across the flat desert floor, leaving trails in dried mud up to 1,500 feet long. These rocks move across Racetrack Playa, a dry lake bed so flat that it varies only 1.5 inches across its entire surface. For decades, nobody had seen the rocks move, leading to theories ranging from magnetic fields to dust devils. The mystery was solved when researchers documented the precise conditions required. The playa must flood with just enough water to freeze into thin sheets on cold nights. Then wind pushes these ice rafts with embedded rocks across the slippery mud beneath. The trails record different movements, straight lines from steady winds, curves from changing directions, even parallel tracks where rocks moved in formation. Some trails show where rocks collided, or where one rock pushed another aside. The phenomenon requires such specific conditions that years may pass between movement events. The Ventura River watershed demonstrates California's precipitation extremes, capable of experiencing 100-year floods twice in a decade, when atmospheric rivers deliver 20 inches of rain in 24 hours. These rivers in the sky, moisture-laden air currents from the tropical Pacific, can carry water equivalent to 15 times the average flow of the Mississippi River. When they encounter the transverse ranges above Ventura, they're forced upward, cooling and dropping their moisture in tremendous deluges. The watershed's steep terrain and short distance to the ocean means floodwaters reach the sea in hours, not days, creating flash floods that reshape the entire river channel. Between floods, the river often runs dry on the surface, flowing underground through gravel beds, appearing and disappearing along its course. The Ventura's behavior exemplifies California's feast or famine hydrology, where water infrastructure must handle both extremes, capturing floodwaters for dry years while protecting communities from devastating flows. Mount Tamalpais rises above San Francisco Bay as a testament to the power of thrust faulting. Ancient seafloor pushed 2,571 feet above the modern ocean. The mountain is built from oceanic rocks, pillow basalts, chert, and serpentine that formed beneath the Pacific millions of years ago and were scraped onto the continent as the ocean floor dove beneath North America. From its summit, the mountain offers views that inspired the birth of mountain biking and the creation of the word Tamalpais, which some claim means sleeping maiden in Coast Miwok, though the etymology is disputed. The mountain creates its own climate, forcing Pacific fog up its slopes where it condenses on redwood needles, creating a rainforest ecosystem just miles from Mediterranean climate valleys. The mountain springs have flowed continuously through recorded history, feeding creeks that supported the growth of early Bay Area communities. Serpentine soils on the mountain support rare endemic plants that have adapted to the toxic levels of magnesium and low calcium that would kill most vegetation. The Algodones Dunes stretch along California's border with Mexico like a piece of the Sahara transplanted to North America. 45 miles of shifting sand up to 300 feet deep. These dunes, the largest dune field in California, formed from sand carried by the ancient Colorado River and reworked by wind for thousands of years. The dunes migrate slowly eastward, driven by prevailing westerly winds, burying and uncovering a wooden plank road built in 1915 to cross this sand sea. The dunes preserve evidence of wetter times, fossil water holes where Pleistocene animals drank, ancient Lake Cahuilla shorelines marked by wave-carved terraces. Despite temperatures that can exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit and rainfall less than 3 inches annually, specialized life thrives here. Endemic beetles that swim through sand, fringe-toed lizards that dance across scorching surfaces, and evening primroses that bloom in response to rainfall. So rare some years pass without a single flower. The silence in the dunes is absolute, sand-absorbing sound so completely that visitors report hearing their own heartbeats. The Long Beach area has extracted over 1 billion barrels of oil since 1921, drawing from deposits laid down 6 million years ago, when this region lay beneath a warm sea. The oil formed from microscopic marine organisms that settled into oxygen-poor basins, their remains compressed and cooked by geological forces into the black gold that would later fuel Southern California's growth. The extraction happened through an architecture of deception: oil derricks disguised as buildings, artificial islands decorated with waterfalls and palm trees to hide industrial infrastructure from beachgoers. These islands, built in the 1960s, appear from shore as tropical paradises, but they're actually massive oil platforms, each one extracting petroleum from reservoirs that extend miles beneath the seafloor. The Thuoms Islands, named for the consortium of oil companies that built them, represent one of the most elaborate camouflage jobs in industrial history. At night, colored lights illuminate the islands' facades, making them appear as resort destinations rather than what they are, monuments to our ability to hide industry in plain sight while extracting ancient sunlight from beneath our feet. Convict Lake nestles in the eastern Sierra like a sapphire set in granite, 140 feet deep, and surrounded by peaks bearing the names of escaped prisoners from an 1871 shootout. The lake formed through glacial carving, ice quarrying out a basin from solid granite and damming it with a moraine of rocky debris. The water achieves an almost impossible blue, so clear that you can watch trout swimming 40 feet below the surface, their shadows sharp on the lake bottom. The surrounding peaks, Mount Morrison, Laurel Mountain, Bloody Mountain, commemorate a violent encounter between escaped convicts from Nevada State Prison and a pursuing posse. But the lake itself maintains a profound tranquility. In autumn, aspens around the lake turn gold in a synchronized display, their reflection doubling the color. The lake demonstrates the Sierra's typical pattern, granite carved by ice into basins that filled with snowmelt, creating thousands of alpine lakes that dot the range like mirrors scattered across the mountains. Each winter, the lake freezes solid enough to walk on, becoming a white plain where wind-carved snow creates sastrugi patterns like frozen waves. California's precipitation gradient presents one of the most extreme contrasts in North America. The northwestern coast receives over 100 inches of rain annually, while the southeastern deserts receive less than 2 inches, a 50-fold difference across a single state. This variation occurs because Pacific storms must cross multiple mountain ranges to reach the interior, each range wringing out moisture like a series of sponges. The wettest spot, near Honeydew in Humboldt County, averages 120 inches yearly, supporting temperate rainforests where Roosevelt elk browse beneath ancient redwoods. Meanwhile, parts of the Mojave Desert go years without measurable precipitation, where a quarter-inch of rain constitutes a significant weather event. This gradient creates a cascade of ecosystems, each adapted to its position on the moisture spectrum, from fern grottos dripping with condensation to valleys where only the most drought-adapted plants survive. The contrast can be stark. Driving from coast to interior, you can experience the equivalent of traveling from Alaska's rainforests to Mexico's deserts in just a few hours. The Coso volcanic field spreads across the desert between the Sierra Nevada and Death Valley, containing one of the world's highest concentrations of Pleistocene rhyolite domes, 38 formed within the last million years. These domes rose like giant blisters of thick, viscous lava, too sticky to flow far from their vents, creating a landscape of volcanic hills scattered across the desert like enormous ant mounds. The field remains active, with fumaroles steaming from cracks and hot springs reaching temperatures of 200 degrees Fahrenheit. The geothermal energy here powers one of California's largest geothermal plants, extracting Earth's heat from reservoirs of superheated water trapped in fractured rock. Native peoples use the obsidian from Coso extensively, and the volcanic field contains one of North America's densest concentrations of petroglyphs. Over 100,000 images pecked into the dark volcanic rocks. These images, some dating back 16,000 years, may represent shamanic visions or hunting magic, their meaning lost, but their presence linking human consciousness to this volcanic landscape across millennia. The rocks continue to crack and steam, reminding visitors that this desert hides fire beneath its surface. Bodega Bay's peaceful harbor nearly became the site of California's first commercial nuclear power plant until geologists made a disturbing discovery. The San Andreas Fault runs directly through the proposed reactor site. In 1958, Pacific Gas and Electric had already excavated a massive pit for the reactor foundation when a young geologist noticed that the bedrock showed clear evidence of fault movement. The discovery sparked one of the first major environmental battles in California, with scientists and citizens arguing that building a nuclear reactor on an active fault was madness. The hole, 140 feet deep and 300 feet across, became known as the Hole in the Head and remains today as a pond, a monument to narrowly avoided disaster. The fault's location here explains the bay's existence. It formed along a zone of crushed rock that erosion could easily excavate. Had the plant been built, it would have sat directly atop a fault that moved 20 feet during the 1906 earthquake. Today, the bay hosts fishing boats and tourists, its waters hiding the trace of the continental boundary that could have turned this peaceful coast into an exclusion zone. California's Great Valley grasslands once covered 23 million acres with native bunch grasses, creating a prairie ecosystem that Spanish explorers compared to a golden inland sea. Today, less than 1% of these grasslands remain, fragmented into preserves that offer glimpses of California's lost prairie. The original grasslands supported herds of tule elk, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, pronghorn antelope that raced across open plains, and grizzly bears that hunted ground squirrels in the spring. The grasses themselves were marvels of adaptation. Purple needlegrass with roots extending 20 feet deep, surviving droughts that would kill European grasses, bunch grasses that lived for centuries, creating pedestals of soil held by their root systems. When millions of cattle arrived during the gold rush, their hooves and grazing patterns favored European annual grasses that had arrived as seeds in livestock feed. Within decades, the native grasslands vanished, replaced by a novel ecosystem of Mediterranean annual grasses that green up with winter rains and turn golden by May. The transformation was so complete that most Californians don't realize their golden hills are covered with non-native plants. The Smith River flows wild through California's northwest corner, the state's only major undammed river, running free for its entire length from source to sea. This river, California's crown jewel of undeveloped waterways, flows through some of the most pristine watersheds remaining on the Pacific coast. The river runs emerald green through gorges carved from serpentine and jade-like rocks, so clear that you can count individual stones on the bottom in pools 20 feet deep. During winter storms, the river can rise 20 feet in hours, transforming from gentle stream to raging torrent that moves van-sized boulders. The Smith supports the healthiest salmon and steelhead runs in California, fish that navigate by mysterious senses to return to the exact gravel bars where they were born. The river's watershed contains the highest concentration of biodiversity in the continental United States, where 30-foot wide Douglas firs grow beside streams that harbor primitive salamanders unchanged for millions of years. The absence of dams means the river maintains its natural temperature regime, sediment flow, and seasonal patterns, a rarity in California where almost every other river has been engineered. Cima Dome rises from the eastern Mojave Desert like Earth's attempt at creating a perfect hemisphere, a granite bubble 75 square miles in area, rising 1,500 feet above the surrounding desert. This dome formed not through volcanic activity, but through the slow rise of granite plutons that never broke the surface, pushing overlying rocks upward into a broad shield. Erosion then worked for millions of years to expose and shape the granite into this remarkably symmetrical form. The dome supports one of the world's densest Joshua tree forests, thousands of these distinctive plants creating a Dr. Seuss landscape across the dome's gentle slopes. The Joshua trees here grow larger and denser than almost anywhere else, some reaching 30 feet tall and living for several hundred years. The dome's elevation creates an island of slightly cooler, moister climate in the desert, enough to support not just Joshua trees, but a complex ecosystem of desert plants and animals adapted to this elevated environment. From the dome's crest, the view extends to 6 mountain ranges across a desert that seems to curve with the earth itself. California contains over 1,000 named glaciers and permanent snowfields, though most are smaller than a square mile and shrinking rapidly as the climate warms. These ice remnants cling to north-facing cirques and shadowed couloirs, mostly above 11,000 feet in the Sierra Nevada and on Mount Shasta. The largest, the Whitney Glacier on Shasta, covers less than a square mile, tiny compared to Ice Age glaciers that filled entire valleys. These small glaciers continue the work of their massive predecessors, slowly quarrying rock from mountain peaks, creating the cirques and arêtes that give California's high mountains their distinctive alpine character. Some glaciers show evidence of recent advance during the Little Ice Age a few centuries ago, with fresh moraines marking their maximum extent. But most are retreating rapidly, some losing half their area in just the past 50 years. The Lyell Glacier, once Yosemite's largest, has separated into 2 smaller ice patches. These glaciers serve as frozen barometers of climate change, their retreat exposing rocks that haven't seen sunlight for thousands of years, releasing water stored as ice since before human civilization began. The Black Hawk landslide sprawls across the Mojave Desert near San Bernardino, a tongue of rocky debris that traveled 17 miles from its source 17,000 years ago. This prehistoric catastrophe began when the north face of Black Hawk Mountain collapsed, possibly triggered by an earthquake, sending millions of tons of marble and limestone racing down the mountain. The debris didn't just tumble and stop. It traveled across the gentle desert floor for miles beyond the mountain's base, spreading across 30 square miles in a sheet up to 30 feet thick. Scientists puzzled over how rocks could travel so far from their source, until they discovered evidence that the landslide rode on a cushion of compressed air, essentially floating across the desert at speeds possibly exceeding 170 miles per hour. The landslide's surface preserves features that formed during movement: pressure ridges, flow patterns, and zones where different rock types sorted themselves while flowing. Today, the landslide appears as a dark apron spread across the tan desert, its surface weathered but still clearly showing the violence of its emplacement, a monument to catastrophic events that reshape landscapes in minutes. Monterey Bay's submarine canyon begins just offshore from Moss Landing, its head lying in water shallow enough that waves touch its rim, before plunging into one of Earth's deepest underwater gorges. The canyon extends 95 miles into the Pacific, reaching depths of 12,700 feet, deeper than the Grand Canyon and rivaling it in scale. This underwater abyss formed through a combination of river erosion when sea levels were lower and ongoing turbidity currents, underwater avalanches that race down the canyon at highway speeds. The canyon acts as a nutrient pump, bringing deep, cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface, creating one of the world's most productive marine ecosystems. Giant kelp forests grow along its edges, while its depths harbor creatures adapted to pressure and darkness. Bioluminescent jellies, six-gill sharks that grow to 20 feet, and octopuses that hover in the water column like 8-armed ghosts. Research submarines exploring the canyon have discovered underwater lakes of dense brine, methane seeps supporting unique chemosynthetic communities, and walls carved with grooves from turbidity currents that continue sculpting this hidden landscape. California's urban heat islands transform cities into thermal archipelagos, with downtown Los Angeles regularly measuring 20 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than surrounding areas. This temperature difference creates distinct microclimates where tropical plants thrive while native species struggle with the artificial warmth. The heat island effect intensifies at night when concrete and asphalt release stored solar energy, preventing the normal cooling that occurs in natural landscapes. These urban hot zones alter local weather patterns. Thunderstorms form over cities on days when surrounding areas remain clear, and fog patterns shift as warm air rising from cities creates gaps in marine layers. The temperature gradient between city and countryside can be so sharp that driving from downtown to the urban edge feels like changing seasons. Birds migrate earlier in cities, plants bloom weeks before their rural counterparts, and some insects now survive year-round in urban areas where they once died off in winter. The heat islands continue expanding as cities grow, creating ever larger zones of artificial climate that may preview California's warmer future. The extinct Shasta ground sloth left remains in California caves showing these elephant-sized creatures survived here until 11,000 years ago, coinciding precisely with human arrival. These massive herbivores, weighing up to 4 tons, left behind caves filled with basketball-sized dung balls that preserve a record of Ice Age vegetation. Analysis of this ancient dung reveals the sloths ate Joshua trees, Mormon tea, and other desert plants, their digestive systems processing tough vegetation that modern animals avoid. The sloth's disappearance, along with mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other megafauna, marks one of Earth's most recent mass extinctions. Their former presence is remembered in the landscape. Wallows they created remain as springs. Paths they wore between water and feeding areas became human trails and eventually roads. Some plants may still await the return of these extinct partners. Joshua trees and other desert plants produce far more fruit than current animals consume, possibly still expecting giant ground sloths to distribute their seeds across the desert. Eagle Lake spreads across Lassen County as California's second-largest natural lake, a closed basin with no outlet to the sea, maintaining unique chemistry that supports a subspecies of rainbow trout found nowhere else on Earth. The lake's isolation for at least 130,000 years allowed its trout to evolve independently, developing adaptations to alkaline water that would kill most fish. These Eagle Lake rainbow trout grow faster and larger than their relatives, reaching 20 pounds in the lake's productive waters. The lake itself expands and contracts dramatically with climate cycles, during wet periods covering 42 square miles, during droughts shrinking to half that size or less. The lake's level has dropped 80 feet from its Ice Age maximum, leaving ancient shorelines etched on surrounding hills like bathtub rings. Despite having no outlet, the lake maintains relatively fresh water through a balance of inflow and evaporation, though its chemistry grows more alkaline each year. Native peoples gathered here for thousands of years when the lake hosted massive waterfowl migrations, and obsidian tools found along its shores were traded from volcanic sources hundreds of miles away. San Nicolas Island lies 65 miles off Southern California's coast, the most remote of the Channel Islands, where the lone woman of San Nicolas survived alone for 18 years in the 1800s. The island formed from undersea volcanoes and uplifted seafloor, creating a windswept mesa surrounded by steep cliffs. Archaeological evidence shows continuous human habitation for 10,000 years by the Nicoleño people, who developed a unique maritime culture adapted to this isolated outpost. The woman, later baptized as Juana Maria, was accidentally left behind during the removal of her people to the mainland in 1835. She survived by making tools from whale bones, clothes from seal skins, and shelter from whale ribs covered with sea lion hides. When found 18 years later, she spoke a language no one could understand, the last speaker of Nicoleño. Today, the island serves as a Navy installation, but its beaches still host elephant seals and sea lions, its waters harbor great white sharks, and its isolation preserves archaeological sites that tell the story of human ingenuity in one of California's most challenging environments. The Berkeley Hills contain sections where the Hayward Fault creeps constantly at 5 millimeters per year, movement visible in offset curbs, bent buildings, and cracked foundations that require constant repair. This aseismic creep, unusual among major faults, releases some strain gradually rather than storing it all for major earthquakes. The UC Berkeley Stadium, built directly across the fault in 1923, has been splitting apart ever since, requiring a multi-million-dollar seismic retrofit that essentially turned it into 2 separate structures that can move independently. Walking through Berkeley neighborhoods, you can trace the fault by looking for the telltale signs: sidewalks that don't align, walls with diagonal cracks, streets with mysterious bumps that reappear no matter how often they're repaved. The creeping section extends from Berkeley to Fremont, a 30-mile zone where the fault never rests. Scientists monitor this movement with laser ranging devices and GPS stations, watching the Pacific Plate slide past North America in real time. Yet this creeping only releases about half the accumulating strain. The rest builds toward the next major earthquake. Goat Rock Beach at the Russian River's mouth consists not of typical sand, but of pillow basalts that erupted underwater 150 million years ago when this location was deep ocean floor. These distinctive rocks, shaped like pillows or cushions, formed as lava erupted beneath the sea, the outer surface cooling instantly while the interior remained molten. Each pillow preserves the moment of its creation: radial cooling joints, glassy rinds, and sometimes hollow cores where lava drained away. The beach changes dramatically with seasons. Winter storms strip away sand to expose the basalt bedrock, while summer waves rebuild sandy beaches that temporarily hide the volcanic foundation. Harbor seals pup here by the hundreds, using the protected waters where river meets ocean. The juxtaposition is striking. A river born in coastal mountains meeting the sea across a beach made from ancient ocean floor, a geological story of how oceans become continents. Waves continue to erode the pillow basalts, creating rounded cobbles that clatter with each wave, a sound unique to beaches formed from volcanic rocks. Big Springs, near Mount Shasta, produces 220 million gallons of crystal clear water daily, California's largest spring system, where an entire river emerges fully formed from the base of volcanic rocks. This water fell as snow on Mount Shasta years or decades ago, percolating through porous volcanic rocks and flowing through underground channels before emerging at a constant 42 degrees Fahrenheit. The springs create an instant river. Within yards of emergence, the flow is large enough for rafting. The water's purity and constant temperature support a unique ecosystem, including endemic species of mayflies and salamanders adapted to these stable conditions. Native tribes considered these springs sacred, the place where the Upper Sacramento River is born. The volcanic aquifer that feeds the springs is vast but poorly understood. Dye tracing experiments show water traveling underground for miles through lava tubes and fractured basalt. The spring's flow remains remarkably constant through droughts and floods, suggesting a massive underground reservoir that buffers seasonal variations. This is water alchemy, snow becoming river through the hidden architecture of volcanic stone. The Panamint Range rises west of Death Valley like a wall between the lowest and highest points of the continental United States, with Telescope Peak reaching 11,049 feet, while Badwater Basin lies at minus 282 feet, just miles away. This extreme relief creates surreal contrasts. Snow falls on Telescope Peak, while the valley floor below reaches 120 degrees, sometimes on the same day. The range formed through basin and range extension pulled upward as Death Valley dropped, creating one of Earth's most dramatic elevation gradients. Ancient bristlecone pines grow near Telescope Peak's summit, some over 3,000 years old, surviving in conditions that seem impossible: hurricane-force winds, winter temperatures below zero, and soil so dry it's essentially gravel. From the peak, the view encompasses both the lowest and highest points in the lower 48 states, a panorama spanning nearly 3 vertical miles of relief. The range's eastern face, rising 11,000 feet from the valley floor, presents one of North America's tallest continuous mountain faces, a wall of rock that seems to support the sky itself. San Clemente Island's western shore displays marine terraces like a giant stairway, each step recording a different sea level from the past million years. These wave-cut platforms, now lifted as high as 1,000 feet above current sea level, formed when the ocean stood at different heights during interglacial periods. Each terrace preserves ancient beaches complete with fossilized shells, beach cobbles, and sometimes the bones of extinct marine mammals. The terraces tell the story of ice ages and warm periods, of advancing and retreating glaciers that locked up or released Earth's water, changing sea levels by hundreds of feet. The island continues to rise, lifted by tectonic forces at about 0.2 millimeters per year, slow by human standards but fast enough to outpace sea level rise during most periods. The terraces create unique ecosystems at different elevations, each supporting different plant communities adapted to specific distances from salt spray and marine fog. From the air, the terraces appear as concentric rings around the island, a topographic record of Earth's climatic breathing over geological time. California's transform plate boundary has moved Baja California and southwestern California 350 miles northwest over the past 20 million years and continues this patient reorganization of the continent's edge. This boundary, primarily the San Andreas Fault System, but including dozens of related faults, accommodates the motion between the Pacific and North American plates. The movement averages 2 inches per year, about the speed fingernails grow, but it occurs in fits and starts, decades of quiet, followed by sudden lurches of 20 feet or more during major earthquakes. This tectonic conveyor belt carries Los Angeles towards San Francisco at a pace that will bring them adjacent in 15 million years. The boundary doesn't just move land horizontally. Compression and extension along bends in the fault create mountains and valleys, constantly reshaping California's topography. Everything west of the San Andreas is essentially a passenger on the Pacific Plate, temporary real estate destined to continue its northwestern journey. In deep time, California is not a place, but a process, a work in progress where the edge of North America is constantly being reorganized by the slow dance of tectonic plates.